Hi guys, and welcome to our first Instagram TV Q&A. It is the 6th of July 2018, and I put up a post just the other day asking for your questions. So I got a good couple of questions. I also got some silly ones. You know who you are. So what we'll do is just work through them. Just got them written down so I can see them from here. And we'll work through them. Some pretty good ones actually. So just starting going backwards. So first question is, what is the best way to improve tissue capacity for jumping slash plyometrics? It's a pretty good question. A lot of people find if they start doing jumping and plyometrics with no real lead-in, quite often this can aggravate knees, particularly patella tendon, sometimes aggravate feet and other areas that have to bear a lot of the brunt of jumping type activities. So the best lead-in I found is generally isometric and eccentric work prior to doing a lot of jumping work. This is why the triphasic GPP method has some pretty gnarly isometric static holds prior to starting the sequence proper. This is also why it's seen now as a good idea for people with tendon issues to do a lot of functional isometrics, things like the Spanish squat, stuff like that, holding what are traditionally pretty gnarly positions, trying to help strengthen tendons. So yeah, if you can throw in some isometrics and some eccentrics prior to an intensive jumping or plyometric block, that's probably a pretty good idea, especially if they've not done a lot of jumping or plyometrics for a long time. I hope that answers your question. Next one. What are your favorite ways to include conditioning when short on space? They also make a comment about how our gym is it's pretty small. I think it's 13 meters across in its longest distance, so it means we can't do a lot of running. And I'm fortunate, I don't work with a lot of athletes that do on-field running. I work with golfers and fighters, so it's not too much of an issue. And the athletes we do work with who do a lot of field-based running get a lot of running in with their sports coaches anyway. But how do we do conditioning when we're short on space? Well, just to my left we have some ski ergs and some sort of assault bikes, so we make use of those. We make extensive use of those. Also behind me we have we have our heavy bag, so our fighters can do some of their alactic or lactate based conditioning with some striking, so we're keeping it fairly sports specific. And then, you know, you don't need a lot of space to get conditioning in. For instance, I figured out for one athlete that I've worked with, our aerobic GPP can be done pretty much in a 2 by 1 meter space, just with push-ups and bodyweight squats, just going 1 for 1, trying to keep a heart rate between 140 to 160, for example. So, you know, you need as much space, you know, as your imagination can think up ideas of how to condition. Like, for instance, you can still do lactate-based conditioning, you know, high rep push-ups, high rep bodyweight squats, you know, maybe do some static holds to keep that accumulation in the muscles. So, you know, this is where you need to be creative. Just because you can't run doesn't mean you can't do conditioning. You know, you've got your body weight that you can use if constraints are super tight. So, you know, you don't need a ton of space, and you don't necessarily have to run. You know, ideally, if you've got like athletes that are sort of very running dominant in their sport, field-based athletes, then yeah, it's going to be tough. You can always find some space, a car park, something like that to run around in. So that's always an option. But yeah, if you're really limited, you know, body weight is a great way to do it. It doesn't have to be sophisticated or complex. You don't need machines necessarily. So, you know, you just gotta be smart with it. Next question. How heavy should I be over my weight class as a fighter? Generally, what I've always adhered to, is the 10% rule. So you want to be walk around weight 10% above your fight weight. If you're any higher than that, it makes life pretty difficult when it comes to cutting. If you read the UFC PI, I've got the manual just here, they state pretty clearly inside, you want to be 10% over your weight. There's a good section on weight cutting in here. If you can get the PDF, I suggest grabbing the PDF of that. But yeah, 10% over, no more than 10% over. If you're 10% over, it's going to make life really tricky. You're going to have to do a really hard weight cut to get your weight down. If you can walk around at less than 10%, that's even better. So yeah, 10% rule, try not to break it. How would you train a fast twitch fighter who gasses out after 4 or 5 rounds? Okay, there's a couple of issues with that. How long are the rounds? How long are your rounds? And what are you doing rounds for? Boxing, MMA. Let's say it's MMA. If you're training for a 3-round fight, then stick to doing 3 rounds. But you got to ask a couple of questions. Are they sparring at the right intensity? If they're fast twitch, they probably have limitation. Are they pacing themselves enough? You say they're fast twitch, so it probably means they have good lactic power, but probably pretty poor capacity. So that's maybe a place where you can start. Are they doing enough work capacity in their own training? Most of the time, most of the guys I work with, they're doing enough sparring and rolling that their base work capacity is generally pretty high. So we just focus on alactic power and lactate-based power, and then capacity for both those qualities. So yeah, if he's what you describe as fast twitch, this probably means he's deadly for the first 10-15 seconds, and then probably gasses out after that. So you've got to take that into account, and you have to have the fighters pace themselves. It's an important part of strategy. You can condition someone super well, but if they don't know how to pace themselves, then they're going to punch themselves out, and we don't want that. So you've got to think, how am I going to work on that? What is it the fighter's lacking? Is the sparring approach he's taking wrong? Maybe we need to change the conditioning approach a little bit. So there's a lot of nuance there that needs to be sort of picked apart in that question. But it's a good question. All right, so that's nearly 8 minutes. I know IGTV is long play, so I can't go over 10 minutes just yet. But this is our first Q&A. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think, and maybe we'll do another one in the near future. Thanks for watching, and power through.